Welcome to my channel. The channel motivates students and researchers to polish their economic skills with a classroom PowerPoint presentation to understand the topic. Today we will discuss and understand the deficit in the budget. A budget deficit means government income is less than its expenditure. In another way, it is a situation where its receipts fell short of its expenditure. There are three basic types of budget deficit. 1. Revenue deficit. When government revenue expenditure is more than revenue income, it is called a revenue deficit situation. It is unrelated to capital receipts and capital expenditure. In case of a revenue deficit, a government is left with no option either to reduce its expenditure, which is basically on administrative, welfare, and defense sectors and generally comes under the priority category, which is difficult to reduce. In the second option, a government can increase revenue receipts by imposing fresh taxes or increasing the tax slab. In other options, the government can use disinvestment or borrowing to fill the gap, but it requires a careful strategy to avoid inflationary pressure and stagnation of economic growth. 2. Fiscal deficit. When there is a gap in revenue and capital receipt against the expenditure, the government faces a fiscal deficit. A fiscal deficit is dangerous for an economy as it leads to inflation, where government borrowing or, in extreme cases, printing additional currency to cover the gap results in a shortage of supply in the market against the demand, creating inflation due to an increased supply of money. Secondly, a government may resort to borrowing, where it seeks help in the form of loans from countries and international institutions like the World Bank, IMF, etc., and it may end up in economic slavery and political interference by foreign powers. Thirdly, when it takes borrowings from multiple sources, it needs to pay the interest along with the principal amount. The interest payment increases the revenue expenditure and starts a cycle where more loan is required to pay for the previous loan. The cycle leads to the accumulation of financial burden and will be dealt with in the future, thus putting extra pressure on the future generation of resources under a debt trap. 3. Primary deficit. It is an indicator used to measure the impact of interest payment on a country's shoulder. It shows the government needs to borrow money for its actual expenses rather than paying the interest on previous borrowings. The higher the primary deficit, more the country will be in the debt trap. Measures to curtail budgetary deficits. 1. By lowering government expenditure. A government facing deficits need to curtail its expenditure. The planned expenditure is difficult to reduce because it slows the pace of development and reduces future growth. Therefore, the onus is on non-development expenditures where subsidies and transfers are needed to be reduced to fill the gap. 2. Raising government receipts. Another means to balance the budget is by increasing the tax. Direct and indirect tax is used to cover the gap. Indirect tax leads to a rise in prices that affect all classes equally and is considered very hurtful to the poor, whereas direct tax is more focused on people who are earning more but are considered negatively motivated as it means you are paying money for your hard and good work. A government generally focuses on widening the tax net to find the middle path. Disinvestment is also used to arrange money by a government, where it hands over the public sector to the private sector in exchange for money. I hope the discussion is helpful. Don't forget to subscribe and stay connected for future discussions.